On March 31st, 1993, suffered a gunshot wound through my side, striking my kidney, following to my spinal cord. This happened because one of my friends was playing with a gun. I walked into another room. The gun went off, went through a wall, and struck me on my side. From the time I was shot until about 3 months afterwards, doctors told me I'd never walk again.
Wow.
When I started getting movement back in my legs, I just knew then that I'll be all right.
Years ago.
It's gonna take a little time. I never gave up, never
I
quit.
think I'm going to start back
Myself.
prior to, not to say I got in trouble, but I was heading down the wrong way in life, right? Like, you know, gang activity. And then also, I think that started right after, I failed the seventh grade, right? Because I repeated the seventh grade. So I started to kind of go down the wrong way a little bit. So I grew up hunting and fishing. This is how my injury happened. I had a really good friend of mine. He came over to my house one day, so-called friend. I haven't talked to him in years. I grew up with guns, of course, right? My father had a gun cabinet in the basement, and I was in the basement. And he had a bunch of rifles that was locked up. They were in a glass gun cabinet where we can see the guns. And he was like, "Man, look at all these guns your father has." So I said, "Listen, man, I got something to show you. I got something really sweet to show you besides those guns that we have, or those rifles and shotguns that was locked up." So I ended up going upstairs to my father's bedroom, and I knew where he kept his handgun. So I go get his handgun from upstairs, and I bring it back downstairs. We're in the basement, and I give him the gun. I give him the handgun. So I had some clothes drying in a completely different room. So I tell him, I says, "Listen, I'm gonna go in the back room and I'm gonna go get my clothes that was in the dryer because I was gonna change." And I went in a completely different room in the basement, and the gun goes off one time. Goes off one time. So the bullet goes through the wall. As soon as I walked into that room, I make 2 steps. Bullet goes to the wall and strikes me right here on my side. Yeah. And I fall. I fall on the ground. And I try to get up. I'm like, man, I've been shot. So I looked on my side right here on the side. And a bunch of blood just starts. I just see a bunch of blood on my shirt. I try to get up. I'm laying down. I try to get up. And I touch my legs. They were numb. I'm like, oh my God, I'm paralyzed. That was the first thing that came to my mind. I'm like, I can't move. I'm paralyzed. And I remember right after I got shot, I couldn't breathe. I was gasping for air. My younger brother was at home, and the guy who had shot me, he came over to me, and I remember him looking at me, and my brother looking at me, and they're like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Man, I can't move my legs, and I can't breathe." So I remember thinking like, "Oh my God!" I'm like, "Man, I'm seriously, I'm paralyzed. I can't move." Ambulance came. They come and get me that night, shortly after I got shot. And I remember getting to the hospital, and I can't, and I'm just, we take a full breath of air, and listen, I was taking 10% of that. I was taking 1/4% of a full breath of air, just gasping for air, and literally I was dying. I didn't know that at that point, but I was in so much pain. I was literally dying. A doctor walked over to me. And I'm like, "Doctor, listen, man." I'm like, "Whatever you do, just put me to sleep. Put me to sleep." So next thing you know, I wake up 3 days later. Put me to sleep. Had a gown on me, and open up the gown, and I see a guy at the, toward my feet, and it was a doctor who had put me in a surgery that night. He's touching my toes. Then he's touching my ankle, and he's like, "Can you feel this?" I'm like, "No, I can't feel that." Then he touches my knee. "Can you feel this?" No, I can't do that. Can't feel it. He touches my leg. And I said, doctor, listen. He says, I remember what happened, you know. And the gown that I had on, I looked down and it had all of these, I opened it up and it had all these staples from here all the way down to below my belly button. I'm like, doctor, well, will I be able to walk again? And he looked at me and he says, no. He says, Corey, you have suffered a gunshot injury to your spine. You're going to be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of your life. He says, you're still going to have a great life. You're still going to be able to move around and have activities, but a lot of your activities are going to be limited. I remember my parents were right there, right? And I just started crying, man. You know? Started crying. And, you know, it was tough. You go from a kid that was highly active, playing basketball, hanging out, and, you know, having a girlfriend here and there, and you end up losing it all just from making one stupid mistake. You know, my thought process for, I don't know, maybe a year after me, you know, after my injury, me being shot, is like, listen, man, I don't want to be here. You know, I want to commit suicide. So there was many days, you know, thinking about how I was going to take myself out. I didn't want to cope with life anymore. I've lost everything. What saved me was more than likely my family. Not more than likely, was my family. That's what saved me. Me having them, their support, right? My brothers, my parents. When you go through what I've been through, you go from having 100 friends down to 2 to 3 friends. My best friends right now, they know who they are. Those were the guys that were on my side. The other guys were, you know, they'll come by and check you out and hang out with you periodically, but that's not Corey. Corey can't do what we doing. So, you know, you go from having 100 friends down to these 2 to 3 really core friends that you know, took care of me and picked me up like I was a baby, and I was, right? They picked me up like I was a kid, put me in the car, put me in my bed, and just taking care of me. So it was that. It was the support that really, you know, saved my life from me committing suicide. About 45 days in the hospital, and then they sent me to rehabilitation for another 90 days almost. Learning how to, you know, learning my new life, which was being confined to a wheelchair. Not only that, during that point in time, you know, we talked to hundreds of doctors, and, you know, you hear from outsourced people, hey, you're going to walk again. You're going to walk again. But you're listening to all of these doctors telling you, Corey, you have no hope. You have suffered a gunshot injury. The nerve damage that you have had for sure is going to keep you paralyzed for the rest of your life. So one day I'll never forget. So I'm in rehab, and there was another guy that was that had a spinal cord injury, and I remember him. God, I wish I remember his name, but he was paralyzed. He had I'm an L3, so his injury was lower than mine, right? So the lower your injury, the better your recovery will be. That's just the way it is when you have a spinal cord injury. And this guy walked on one cane, and I prayed to God. I'm like, God, just give me the ability to walk on one cane. Just do that for me. After a year of therapy, you know, just me learning my new way of life, I wake up one morning, and I'll never forget. My right leg started moving just a little bit. I mean, just a little bit. I mean, just maybe a quarter of an inch. Quarter of an inch. Huge. I have hope. So, you know, when I was thinking, I'm like, my gosh, I have hope. So my right leg started to move a little bit, and I go, you know, I was still in therapy. I go to my therapist, like, look, he was blown away. You know, he called some of the other medical spine doctors, and like, look at this. So they started putting back then. They still do it now. They started putting electrodes on my right leg, and then guess what? It started getting stronger, and stronger, and then next thing you know, my left leg started moving a little bit, just a little bit, not much, just a little bit. And they put me in the pool. I love to swim. It's my cardio, even to this day. I love the water. Started getting stronger and stronger and stronger over time. And hey, listen, I'm gonna be able to walk again one day, right? I am. Years of therapy, I was able to get to one cane. When I was in rehab, I was in a room with two quadriplegics, and I was in the middle. So not only my family support helping me, but to listen to what these other two guys went through as quadriplegics really made me appreciate what I had because I was a paraplegic at that point in time. One kid he suffered a gunshot, and they were all cervical injuries. He had to be my age at that point in time. He was 17 years old, and then there was another guy. He had to be mid-50s, maybe 60. He was in a car accident. And to listen to what those guys went through for those 30 or 60 days that we were roommates, and listen to the guy that was my age. Oh, my girlfriend left me, right? And he had a kid. Them telling me how lucky I was because I'm able to get in the wheelchair to move around. Listening to the doctors come into the room middle of the night, turning these guys over because they can't turn themselves over. Them having bed sores and them not able to feed themselves, or, of course, we all had to catheter, or we couldn't control our bowel movement because we're paraplegics. I was a paraplegic. I couldn't control that. And those guys, of course, couldn't either. But listening to what the nurses had to do for those guys because they were paralyzed from the neck down, really, that's another thing that really made me appreciate me being a paraplegic. In life, we talk about mindset. We talk about, hey, listen, life can be worse, right? And that's almost as worse as anyone can get. And God bless those, God bless these people that are quadriplegics, because they're in my heart to the day I die, listening to and knowing what they go through day in and day out. After my 90 days in rehab, and after 30 days of being in the hospital, I'm in therapy because, my legs started moving a little bit. A year and a half later, I tell my parents, I got to go. I have to leave. I got accepted in college to Eastern Michigan University. Finished college in 3.5 years. Never missed a day of college. I remember going to class on days where I'm the only guy in class. At that point in time, I had a wheelchair and a walker. Sleet, snow, ice, rain, doesn't matter. I made it a class. So one day I'm in the barbershop, and I still go to my boy Tom on 6 Mile in Detroit. I go to Tom, and Tom's telling me about this guy by the name of Greg. Greg happened to come in that same day I was there, and Greg was like, "Listen, man," he said, "I'm looking for an assistant." He was this big wig guy at one of the best companies I've ever worked for, Quicken Loans. They call it Rocket Mortgage now. And he says, "Listen, I'm looking for an assistant, to help me generate business." He ended up hiring me as an assistant, and he had about 10 banks in the inner city of Detroit under a company called Michigan National Bank. I started working as a mortgage banker assistant at a bank, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. All the leads used to come to me, and my job was to follow up with these people. And you better believe it, I followed up with every single lead that was given to me. And then next thing you know, Greg, he had more business than he can handle. for me making these calls and building these relationships and talking to these people day in and day out, and I ended up loving it. So I started, making some decent money. I started from the bottom, man. I was there for almost 10 years. 7 out of 10 years, I became the top, either one or top three in mortgage sales throughout the entire company. Made more money than I knew what to do with it at that point in time in my life. 600,000, buying a bunch of real estate at that point in time. And I was a 7-figure wage earner at that point and worked extremely hard. First one in the office, last one to leave. I guess maybe that's from college, right? First person in class, and 80 hours a week. And I got married at that point. Had a daughter, Paige. Built a huge house in Michigan, 5,000 square feet, somewhere in that ballpark. Beautiful home. And the market tanks. 2008 hits. Things stop. So you go from making $40,000, $50,000 every single month, bunch of rental property, income coming in passively, and you go from making that to 5,000 or 6,000. My livelihood was based on 50 to 60,000 every single month. I became, I call it, financially paralyzed, and it was hard. It was hard. Went through a divorce. Love my ex-wife. She's fantastic. It was hard. It was rough, man. It was rough. I lost all my real estate. I lost my home. I ended up selling that on a short sale. I pretty much lost almost $3 million. And so I remember one day I'm laying in the bed, and I had cameras at my old house, and sometimes I drive past that home and just say, "Oh my God, I missed that house." One day I'm laying in the bed, and I'm turning the TV on, and back then, you had the old, maybe that was the analog cameras or whatever it is, and turn the TV on, I see a tow truck driver pull up in my driveway. I'm like, oh man, here it is. And that was only 60 days past due on my car, but heck, the banks was repossessing cars in 60 days. Tow truck driver rings the doorbell. He says, "Sir, I hate to do this to you, man." He says, Normally I don't do this. I'm here to repossess your car. The bank has sent me out here for me to come and get your car. Is there anything inside the car that you want? I said, yes, there is. And I was cool. He was super cool. Very, very nice of him to ring the doorbell to get my stuff out. So I get my items out on my car. He picks up the car. He turned the hazard lights on. He turns the hazard lights on. He picks up my car that was sitting in the driveway, and he takes my car, and he was going up the street, broad daylight. And all I remember, even to this day, is those hazard lights flashing. Because I walked down to the edge of my driveway in the middle of the street, watching my car get towed away. So not only at that point in time I was living by myself, because my daughter and my ex-wife, they had moved and was going through those issues. I lost every single dollar that I had. I was in foreclosure at that point in time. I didn't have a car. Every single morning I think about that. I wake up and I remember those hazards flashing in my head. And that's one reason why I'm so motivated. Those hazard lights are lights that never have went away. End up leaving Michigan. My parents ended up co-signing for a car for me. South Florida was just always been on my mind. That's a place that I wanted to. This place here is where I always wanted to end up moving to. I got my real estate license. I didn't want to do mortgages anymore. I got my license down here in South Florida. End up renting a place out. So I go from 5,000 square foot to 700 square foot apartment, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and I went to work. For certain, after losing everything, I was depressed, man. I was 100% depressed. I'm like, oh my God, man, it feels like I was financially crippled. And if I'm like, oh God, God, you give me 2 strikes. First of all, I get shot and I'm paralyzed, and I'm paralyzed from the knees down now, right? Now I'm financially, paralyzed. I can't move, can't do anything, and I worked. That kept me not from being so mentally distracted or depressed, because I was depressed. I wanted to give up on life again. I'm like, wow, this is twice. I wanted to give up, man. But I remember one day, I'm like, fuck, I'm ready to fucking blow my brains out. I'm laying in bed. I had my gun on the side, I had my gun on my table. I'm like, screw this life. And my daughter had a picture. I'm laying on the bed, staring at the fan, just that whole night for like days, like 4 or 5 days, just staring at the fan. I get up and I go back to the bed, staring at the fan. And then one night I'm like, you know what? Forget it. I don't want to deal with this anymore. So I had my gun right here on my table, just sitting there. And I grabbed the gun, and then I looked up and I had a picture of my daughter, Paige. And when I looked at her, I just cried. I cried, man. I cried. I'm like, I can't do this. I cried and cried and cried. And I knew it was just time for me to check out in Michigan. Yeah, I had 2 strikes. I had 2 bad strikes in my life. And I didn't want to deal with it anymore. So I left. So I packed up, go to the 700-foot apartment. I worked 80 hours a week making phone calls after phone calls. And I started to build a business. At that point, listen, I was working 7 days a week. I was working 80, 90 hours a week. I didn't have nothing to do. I wanted my lifestyle back so bad that I did whatever it took back then in order for me to get my lifestyle that I had prior to the crash back. I had a goal. I had a goal that, hey, listen, by the time I'm 40, I'm done. I'm retired. So that setback of working 10 years, the same amount of hours of a goal that I had to almost retire at 40 put me back in time. So I worked extremely hard for 10 years. And in 2016, Keller Williams Realty, which we are the #1 real estate company in the world by agent count, I finished number 5 in the world as far as real estate sales. That was a huge, aha moment for me, where I said to myself, listen, I can do it again. I'm definitely back to where I was years ago when I was back at Rock Financial, or even more so. But that's it. So I told my story, and this is what I look at every day when I come home, and just kind of take myself, reminisce on where I come from and what I've been through, and just blessed to be here.